when we look at the European map, of course, with also knowing the forecast, what is happening, let's say, on the continent, and here also in the UK, I think, Turkey together with Poland and also Russia on the European map are the leading markets. What I will do with you, I will try to position a little bit Turkey from, let's say, a more qualitative point of view, from, let's say, the economic position of the country, also the geopolitical position of the country. And then, of course, as Multi, we are, let's say, rather retail-oriented. Of course, I will have some focus on, let's say, the retail part of the market. And I will try to keep it relatively short. When we look to a couple of words about Multi, I mean, we have been in the market basically since 2004. We started exploring the market in 2003. And, of course, being a developer, we had in 2005, we closed our first investment deal for a project in Izmir in the west of the country with Commerz, and of course that was basically our prelude into the Turkish market. Since then we have been very active in the development and mall management market. We have completed 10 shopping centers in the meantime, 1 under construction, and we have a couple of more in different stages of development. Combination of, let's say, development, mall management, and also asset management. We manage, of the 10 assets, we manage 8 in asset management for the Forum Turkey Fund, in which also we ourselves, but also Canadian pension program Morgan Stanley, are shareholders. And basically, in Turkey we are very happy to be in the market. What basically makes Turkey? I always say it's the combination of volume and growth. I mean, volume, it of course is a large country, it has a large economy and a large population. When we look at the size, second largest country in Europe after Russia. When we look at the GDP, it's in the meantime it's the top 6 economy also in Europe, and it's also a persistent member also of the G20 leading economies in the world. So Turkey counts basically on the global platform. And when we look at the population, and let's exclude Russia, then basically Turkey is the largest, is the second largest country in Europe after Germany. So it's a big marketplace. And there is growth, particularly, it doesn't matter what dimension we are looking at. It has already been mentioned, economics, demographics, and also urbanization and household formation. So, of course, for retail, but also for housing developers, workplace creators, offices, logistics, I mean, the growth parameters are all in plus. Partly connected, let's say, to the international context and the international positioning of the market of Turkey, but also simply the internal drivers, growing population, growing domestic demand, which also drives, let's say, the economy. Turkey traditionally being positioned as a bridge between the West and the East, and of course the country positioned in Southeastern Europe, second largest country, 1.5 times the size of Spain. But when we look, of course, to the population, I mean, it's the size and also the growth trend what, of course, is defining. At the moment, approximately 75 million inhabitants. And, of course, what is particular is the young age composition. About half of the population is 25 years old or younger. And that, of course, contributes enormously to the market dynamics. Also, when you look in more detail to the age composition, it's particularly, let's say, the young adults which have a high share. So in the coming years, the high rate of household formation, also the high rate of, let's say, new people coming into the labor market, new people graduating from the university will increase. So there is a lot of dynamics, basically, in the young adult part of the market. And of course, if we look at Turkey and we compare it to the rest of Europe, I mean, the demographic dynamics put the country in a unique position. And connected to that, of course, the urbanization and the household formation. I mean, all of us, we are of course familiar to the largest city in the country, and Istanbul as gateway. But in the meantime, Turkey has 6, 7 cities with basically a population of exceeding 1 million inhabitants. And another 6, 7 cities with a population exceeding 500,000. And then when you look below it, another 45 cities with basically a population in between 100,000 and 500,000. So from an urban network point of view, from a, let's say, market pattern point of view, but also a logistic point pattern view, you have a very big diversity of markets in the area, which of course drive the different sectors throughout the country. And also the household formation, I mean, you can see with the blue bars the rapidly increasing household number of households in the country, whereas at the same time we see basically the average size gradually decreasing. In Turkey, households still relatively large when we compare it to most of Europe. Western Europe in general stands around 2.1. In Turkey it's around 4. That has to do with, of course, a higher number of children per household. it has also to deal with the fact that one-person households, whether we are talking about, let's say, people who start to live on their own before marriage, or let's say widowed elderly people, that's still pretty uncommon in Turkey. The political structure, I mean, one of the drivers, I think, of the economic growth and the dynamics in the country is basically the high level of stability in the country since 2002. I mean, Turkey has had its own crisis in the 2001-2002 period. 2 years before then, 1999 and 2000, there were two big earthquakes struck the country, two regions east of Istanbul. So basically that combination of natural disaster and economic crisis, I think, was one of the impetus that basically Turkey in 2002, the electorate decided to vote, let's say, on a party which had a certain promise for stability at that time and was able to create a government based on one party, so no coalition government. And since 2002, the AKP government, basically by following relatively stable economic policies originally designed by the IMF, and also following policies on the international scene, basically widening the scope of the country from more or less Europe-oriented to more, let's say, regional and global-oriented, that basically created a stable platform for the economy and also a wider platform for the external trade, on which we will come back later. And basically, also, you can see how it developed basically over time. If you look at, let's say, the left-hand map, basically the position of Turkey seen from Europe, it's really right below. And dependent on who designed the map, often the map ends at Istanbul, and if the map is a little bit more general, it goes maybe towards Georgia and the Caucasus. But that is probably, from a European point of view, as generous as you can get it. But of course, when you look to the world and you look at where is Turkey in reality, it is actually on the crossroads between Europe and Asia, from west to east, and of course from Russia and the Central Asiatic republics to Africa, from the north to the south. And I think that's one of the issues the current government, but the previous government, the pre-2002 government already started with that, basically shifting the orientation of the country and making use of the central location it has. Not just a bridge, but actually being a hub. And I think that's one of the reasons, if you look also to the Turkish economy and if you look to the trade patterns, which have been diversifying at high speed in, let's say, the last decades, what has been very successful. And whether it's about tax agreement, free trade agreements, or let's say visa agreements between Turkey and many countries, I think that has been a very important facilitator, changing the position on the map. And of course, when we look to the economics, we can also see that happening. I mean, Turkey, if we look at the economy in 2011, I mean, 550,000 billion euros, approximately so. When looking to the European map, it was already the top 6 economy. And definitely, if we look to Central Europe, and let's say the more emerging markets, Turkey is actually the biggest emerging market we have in the European market space. So very exciting. And again, if we look, let's say, at the economic trends, and we see, of course, 2010, 2011, Turkey very successful in terms of GDP growth. It was one of the leading growing economies in the world. 2012, I mean, a slowdown, but the whole world is slowing down. And I think with a growth rate approaching 3%, everybody in Europe would be extremely happy. And when we look at, let's say, the forecast, and okay, the forecast still has to prove that it becomes true, but we see an average rate of, let's say, 4 or 5% a year. And again, seeing that basically most of the matured economies will have a stable pattern, hopefully still a 0% growth pattern, maybe not more negative. I think Turkey in that sense is in a very promising position when we look to the economic parameters. And of course what helped is basically the economic restructuring what set in after 2002. Because Turkey used to be a country in the 1990s of high inflation, high debt and structural instability with the current account deficit. So Turkey was basically a hyperinflationist economy and highly volatile. And I think one of the successful things of, let's say, the last 10 years is that Turkey left that phase behind. Then the inflation rate, of course, for European standards, still relatively high. But I remember 15 years ago when people got the money, they made sure they spent it before the end of the month, because then, basically it was almost not there anymore. So those times are over. And the current account deficit, the same. I mean, okay, if you look at the figures, it's relatively low, but on the other hand, it's relatively high. But of course, there is a high level of tourism, and also in Turkey, informal economy is still relatively large. So the real current account deficit and the real impact it has is most probably more moderate than we see in the graph. But more importantly, when we look at the finances, Basically, Turkey having been very successful the last 10 years to keep the government budget under control. That again was not common in the history of Turkey. So in that sense, Turkey shifted from, let's say, also a relatively stable country. And the public debt is Turkey, of course, if you look compared to most of the European markets, again, very favorable. About 40% of GDP. I think most of us would be very happy if we would see such a graph about our own country. But again, Turkey used to have a public debt of approximately 100% of GDP. So you can see that the last 10, 15 years, the country has really gone through an enormous transformation. And that also translates in the fact that basically, particularly the foreign direct investments have been increasing over the recent years. I mean, when I started going to Turkey in, let's say, end 1990s, and we were looking to foreign direct investors, and people say, too unstable, we don't know it, and so on. And basically, foreign direct investments used to be always below $1 billion a year. Again, that has dramatically changed. And that has to deal with the increased stability. It has also to deal with the fact that also Turkey joined a lot of international agreements facilitating trade and investments, and also international arbitration is now also part of the economic game in Turkey. So from both the institutional point of view and economic point of view, the country is much more open than it used to be 10, 15 years ago. And of course, connected to that, when we look, and that of course is for the retail, one of the key parameters, but for most of the real estate sectors as well. When we look at, let's say, the composition of the market, of course a key element is, let's say, the changing structure of, let's say, the lower classes, middle classes, upper classes. And I think one of the key factors defining the market also in the last 10 years has been that basically major part of, let's say, the lower income households in mainly the urban areas, in the large urban areas, have gradually been shifting to middle class ranks, whereas also, let's say, a share of middle class ranks have been successful in shifting to, let's say, upper middle class ranks. And of course, looking on an urban map, that means also that many more locations in the city became relevant for consumption. And of course, that's also what developers have been very successful in, let's say, capitalizing on in recent years and still will be in the coming years. Looking to the map on Turkey, of course, spending power per capita, concentration, Istanbul, the Marmara region, and along the coast. But what does the map show? That is basically that the Anatolian hinterland, which was always considered to be relatively empty, maybe with the exception of Ankara, is actually becoming more colorful. Regional cities, towns of importance, they are starting to get their, let's say, economic dynamics, and that's also translating into an increasing spending power. And again, when we put, let's say, Turkey in the European context, I mean, it's of course, if you look at the income levels per capita, the spending power per capita, it's, let's say, still a middle income country. But when we look at, let's say, Central Europe, and where Central Europe has been heading for in the last 10 years, and when we look at Turkey, we basically see that Turkey is reaching Central European levels. And the parts of Turkey are already there. So the market, in that sense, is developing, is maturing. And when we look at, let's say, the spending power map of Europe, and we look at the density, so there's spending power per capita, in combination, let's say, with the number of people living there, you can see that, of course, as Turkey has a high number of large cities, some of the market areas in Turkey, particularly Istanbul, but also Ankara and Izmir, are definitely among the leading market areas in Europe. So highly relevant. And that, of course, I mean, from a retail point of view, that has been led, to an enormous growth, let's say, in the retail spending. Turkey already being the 7th largest retail market in Europe. Retail spending per capita, basically approaching 2,000 euros per capita per year. And of course, that makes Turkey for also international retailers, whether it's consumer electronics, whether it's fashion, whether it's furniture, increasingly important. So the traditional picture, which many of us know about Turkey, or let's say know from Turkish communities in Europe, but the reality starts more looking like this. Modern high streets, modern retail environments, and particularly, organized retailers, international formats, etc. So the market is going through a fast process of modernization, partly connected, let's say, to the growth of the country, and partly also to an autonomous process of, let's say, transition from traditional retail, bazaar retail, to, let's say, modern retail formats. And of course, the picture nice for property owners, having the question whether there are tenants. Well, the tenants are definitely there. Whether they are from abroad, in Turkey, more importantly, whether they are from the country itself. So a highly dynamic market and very promising. And of course, when we look at the market, and you can translate it to the economy, you can translate it to other sectors, but basically the market growing relatively fast. And when we look at, let's say, the position, the growth potential of Turkey in the coming years, and we compare that to other emerging markets, Turkey obviously, from market point of view, a leading opportunity, also compared to the rest of Europe. So, of course, real estate, shopping centers, I mean, relatively a young phenomenon in the country compared to Europe. Started in 1988 with the development of the first projects in the market, but then gradually that developed into a more conceptually strong shopping center scene, more modern projects with also a stronger focus on concept, on design, public space, etc. But when we look at the statistics, of course the growth of the shopping center market in Turkey has been phenomenal. But also again, if you look at, let's say, the growth potential of residential, of offices, etc. I mean, what happened in the last 10 years in all the sectors is very strong, is highly dramatic. So of course, and when we, let's say, put also the country, we look at, let's say, the development potential, and we compare that for the coming years compared to other markets, Turkey will still be one of the countries where development will be relatively strong. And also when we look at, let's say, the density in Turkey, we have a shopping center supply of approximately 100 square meters per 1,000 inhabitants. So a total supply of approximately 8 million. If you compare that to most of Europe, including, let's say, the Southeastern European countries, we see that basically density, it has been growing very fast, but it's still relatively low. So an indicator of, let's say, the potential, what is still going to come. On the rents and the yields, I mean particularly the yields, that will be most probably an interesting discussion also today in respect of, let's say, the recent deal with Blackstone. But again, if you compare it into the international context, also thanks to the fact that basically the impact of the global crisis in Turkey has been relatively modest in 2008-2009, we see, let's say, relatively stable patterns of rents and particularly relatively strong patterns of expected yields. I think we are getting to, let's say, the discussion. I think that's the most relevant part of the day. But why Turkey? I think it's the combination of volume and growth what makes the market interesting. And also, I mean, Turkey is not ready. Cities are still being built. Urbanization is ongoing. Infrastructure is actually being constructed. So the country is literally under construction. I think that makes the country a very interesting market. It drives the economy. It drives the retail. It drives the consumption. It drives working places. So very relevant. And of course, looking to the fact that the country is still under construction, looking maybe to the fact also that urban development in the last decades has been highly functional, there is a high demand for quality. Whether it's earthquake-proof, whether it's sustainability, there are a lot of project parameters which will define the development in the future and makes the market exciting for people who want to be there. And of course, I mean, if you look also to our own experience, when you have the right product, when you have the right location, when you have the right concept, the success, the durable success, the long-term success has been proved. So I think, the market as such offers a lot of bright opportunities. Thank you very much, and I hope we are going to have a nice discussion.